So, how do I end up in a relationship where my husband's 30 years younger? November will mark 10 years since I first met my husband online, even, not even in person. We have been married 7 years, so that's still a good while, and that'll actually come up in May, our anniversary. And it's ironic because first, I've never thought of myself as getting married for several reasons. First of all, for a lot of my life, it wasn't on the table. It wasn't, same sex marriage hadn't come along yet. Um, And also, I did not see myself being in a relationship with an age gap that like we have, and also having to start off in such a long distance relationship, which I'd actually sworn off for a long time. Of course, I dated all age groups, but I think when I was first like, 18, 19, it really kind of surprised me when, you know, men that were old enough to be my father, sometimes my grandfather would. It did bother, of course, to talk to me or even if they wanted to try flirting. But sometimes I think what was more distasteful to me, you could say, was the fact that sometimes they might be a little bit too aggressive. And I think also when I was meeting them, the setting was usually a bar. So I think sometimes I thought if I had been drinking and maybe, I guess this happens with other people that, the more that they've had to drink, the more likely they might be open to sleeping with somebody that they wouldn't otherwise be. Um, I was actually the opposite, and I think just because for me, alcohol was a true depressant, which meant the more I drank, the less physical I wanted to do. So if I was not interested in someone before having a drink or two, I was definitely not going to afterwards because it it just would be too much work. Um, on that note, though, I will say that as I got older into my 20s, most of my relationships that I was in, there was an age gap, not as big as the one I'm in now, but usually 10 years. And I was always the younger one in the relationship. So that was kind of another, juxtaposition in the relationship that we're in now, that I'm in now, or in the marriage I'm in now, I should say. I still dated quite a bit. And I think I was more looking for a friends with benefits situation than I was for, long term one and only. I think more so because the more years that I was single, the harder it was to give up just doing what I wanted when I wanted. When you're only accountable to yourself for a long time, it's hard to compromise and, be accountable for a lot of things with other people. So you really have to want to be in that. And I was an exchange student years ago, so I speak Spanish. And and I'm also Spanish speak Mexico and Central America are close by. So I can travel to Spanish speaking countries relatively easily. And this was just one time I was planning a trip and I was on a website. It's called El Chat. And you can actually divide it by countries and just talk to people from that country. So sometimes, it was easier to just, hop on and ask, somebody questions about like, what's this like? What's that like? What do I do once I get to such and such place? I was planning to go on a trip to Mexico in 2013, and I just happened to be on looking for someone who could give me some the information I was looking for. That was when my husband Luis first noticed me, and I had my screen name in Spanish. It said something I think like Gringo Traveler, something like that, and I think that's what caught his attention was he was actually very interested in traveling, although his family was actually not well to do, you could say, in Honduras. He did want to travel. He was also very interested in the United States. And he was also very interested in education. So I didn't think much about it because, and frankly, at the time I was thinking, I'm busy. I don't need to be talking to you right now because you're not even from the country that I'm going to. But I did give him my email and you know, promptly forgot about it. As a single male, talked to other younger men from some of these countries, and they always started asking for money, which kind of got to be annoying. So I did have my guard up as far as that goes, and that was one of the reasons I wasn't really embracing talking to him. But little by little, we started talking, kind of about what he was doing. His family wanted him to drop out and go to work because they were, a lower income family. The actual education was free, but getting a hold of materials and study materials, he was pretty resourceful about doing that. And he didn't have a laptop at first, which, when I first saw how hard he was working, eventually, once I realized there's going to be more, I did end up buying him a laptop, but this wasn't for, at least another year or so. And my degrees were also because I have a bachelor's and master's in business, and that's what he was studying. So, of course, a lot of what he was studying, I definitely remembered and I could talk about. And on the weekends, he was taking a class just to learn English. Because I think his aspiration at the time was to work in a call center, an English speaking call center that they have down there. So we started to, have a bond. And I think too, because Honduras is a kind of a rough country, I would worry, I'd start to worry about him too. Like, did he make it home okay and things like that. So, it was something like that that started to come about, even though we didn't think like, oh, let's see about dating or something like that. A friend and I had just, I don't know how we managed to see this, incredibly cheap trip to Panama. So I said, hey, why don't you come on this trip? As much as we've, flirted and things like that, I said, in person, you may not like me, and that's totally fine. You'll have a trip out of it, we can be friends and all that. So the trip actually went really well. And so I went to Roatan, Honduras, which is an island, a tourist destination in Honduras. I did ask him, did he want to get married and come to the United States? And yeah, and I kind of thought too, because I didn't know if it took 1 year or 5 years. And I thought, if that way, if our relationship isn't meant to be, then it'll fall apart before that. So originally, we just were putting the trip together. We are going to go to Madrid and Rome and Paris, and spend, nearly a week in each one. So that was going to be our big trip of that year. And that was when I started realizing maybe getting married when I get back. And still, I had not read about like getting a visa. I was like really naive. I was like, if we can get married in one of those countries, let's do it. So what ended up happening was we would have to get married in Iceland. Most countries have an issue with you have to file 2 weeks ahead of time in person and then come back in 2 weeks to that same office and then you can get married, which, that, just to hang out for 2 weeks in one spot would be kind of a pain. Iceland was the only country you could do everything ahead of time. And basically what they're looking for is bigamy. So we ended up getting married there. I came back and filed for his visa. And that's how I ended up having a husband that was 30 years younger than me. So he's just learning a lot of new things anyway. So I think in that aspect, I have to be kind of like a coach, a mentor, um, and also to have somebody dependent on you is a different dynamic. And I think going into that, that was one thing I was very aware of, and I didn't want to over leverage. People do look at us, but I'm never sure why, because sometimes we walk in. So you've got me, an American, him, he definitely looks Latino, and we're speaking Spanish. So people kind of don't know what to make of us. I've been asked before if he's my son, although other people have said, that we look good together, that we function well together. So I think we get public reaction, but I think it's more because we just look like two people that you wouldn't normally see together, just based on either speaking language together and or the fact that we're obviously definitely from different cultures, and then again, the age thing. As far as my family was very accepting actually of him because I was single for a long time. So once I finally decided to settle down with somebody, I think they all just kind of figured that since I had taken so long just to find a person, that there must be something that I really liked about that person. So they trusted my judgment as opposed to what you might think if somebody is kind of a serial bride, where they jump in one relationship and go to another. I was kind of the opposite. So I think they just trusted my judgment. They definitely, welcomed him to the family. And they actually went down to see him with me when we just realized we were going to get married. So my sister, stepmother, and nephew went on that trip. But I really can't imagine being in a different relationship with anybody else. And I think for a lot of reasons too. From my perspective, it also kind of gives me more of a sense of purpose to be married to somebody who's getting their career going. He's an accountant actually in the same company where I work now. He's working on his master's now. The challenges again and having, his goals to achieve again. It was kind of a nice change because I think before that, my only other project was going to be starting my own business, which we may or may not do. I think I'm getting closer to just thinking about retirement now than I am to thinking about starting a new business, although Luis would definitely be open to a new business or starting his own business.